By the time the Clone Wars began, Mace Windu held a place in the Jedi Order that no one else did. He sat second only to Yoda on the High Council. He was the Order's most respected combat mind, and he held a power his own Order had banned other Jedi from learning, because everyone who had ever tried to copy him had either failed or fallen. The first thing that set him apart was a fighting style he invented. Mace Windu created Vaapad, the seventh and most dangerous form of lightsaber combat. It was the hardest form ever recorded by the Jedi, and one that ran through the dark side. To use it, a Jedi has to enjoy the fight. They have to take their opponent's anger into themselves and let it flow back out again, like a circuit. Mace described it as becoming half of a superconducting loop, with the other half being raw darkness. The form does not just allow contact with the dark side, it requires it. That's why almost no other Jedi could use it without falling. The novel Shatterpoint, also by Stover, is built around Mace's most trusted student, his former Padawan Depa Billaba. She was a Jedi Master, a member of the Council, and one of only 2 living Jedi who had been trained in Vaapad with Mace's approval. By the start of the book, the war had pushed her past the limits of the form, and she had begun to slip into darkness. Mace traveled to her home planet to either bring her back or end the threat she had become. No other Jedi had any chance of doing either. Other Jedi who tried to learn Vaapad fell harder. Master Sora Bulk, a fellow lightsaber instructor at the temple, helped Mace develop the form and then turned to the dark side, joined the Separatists, and allied with the assassin Asajj Ventress. The Corran Master's verdict on Sora was direct. He did not master Vaapad, Vaapad mastered him. Mace was the only living being who had ever mastered it. Vaapad wasn't even the strangest thing about him. Mace had a force gift the Order calls Shatterpoint Perception. In the novel by the same name, he describes it the way a jeweler describes a gem. The same crystal that gives the stone its strength also has hidden fault lines, single points where a precise tap will split the gem in half. Mace could see those points in anything, including any object, person, or situation, and use them. He used the ability against the bounty hunter Jango Fett on Geonosis. The Stover novel describes Fett as a perfect combination of weapons, skills, and the will to use them. The Corran Master looked at him, found the Shatterpoint, and left a headless corpse on the sand. The same gift let him read entire planets, entire wars, and individual decisions made in front of him. It was a unique combination, a force gift that read the world like a map of weaknesses, and a fighting style built to exploit them. By the end of the war, almost no Jedi argued with him. The Revenge of the Sith novel calls Mace and his ally Agent Kolar the 2 greatest blades beings the Order had ever produced. The Corran Master ran the Order's secret investigation into the hidden Sith Lord directing the war. The plan to draw that Sith out was his plan. The order to make the arrests, when it came, would be his to give. All 3 of those things sat with one Jedi, and he had walked the dark side his whole life without ever falling into it. That is what set him apart. He was the most dangerous Jedi in the Order, and the only one whose power came from a place no other Jedi could safely reach. On the night the war ended, all of that power put him face to face with the Sith Lord who had built the conflict. He won the duel, but what happened to him after has never been settled.
Mace Windu's fate is one of the longest-running unsolved mysteries in Star Wars, and after 20 years, Canon still refuses to settle it. His fall from the Chancellor's office looked final, yet nothing about that night has ever been confirmed, despite countless opportunities to do so. George Lucas left the question open. Lucasfilm has preserved that ambiguity ever since, and Samuel L. Jackson remains adamant that his character survived. The evidence surrounding those final moments reveals exactly why this debate has persisted for 2 decades, and why the answer may not be what fans have always assumed. In a recent appearance on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, Jackson laid out his case once again, arguing that his take on Mace's survival isn't controversial at all.
Just because they cut my arm off and I fell out a window doesn't mean I'm dead. Yeah.
He even referenced his iconic character Jules Winfield from Pulp Fiction, joking that the 2 survivors might be wandering the galaxy together somewhere.
Yeah, he's out there walking the earth with Jules.
Additionally, what makes this argument more than wishful thinking is the conversation that started the entire debate. Over a decade after Revenge of the Sith, Jackson revealed that he had asked George Lucas directly whether Mace survived the fall, and Lucas did not shut it down. Instead, he told Jackson that he was okay with that possibility and that Mace could be alive. That single exchange opened a door that has never been closed, which means the creator of Star Wars himself left room for the character's return. Mace's chances of survival become clearer when the confrontation in Palpatine's office is examined closely. The sequence of events points to a remarkable detail that often gets overlooked. Mace Windu won his lightsaber duel with Darth Sidious. He didn't just hold off the Sith Lord, but achieved outright victory over the most dangerous darkside user the galaxy had ever seen. And what had happened moments before in that very same room puts this in perspective. Palpatine had cut down 3 Jedi Masters in mere seconds, with Agen Kohler falling first, Saesee Tiin following immediately, and Kit Fisto lasting only slightly longer before succumbing as well. These weren't ordinary Jedi, but council members and experienced warriors who had endured countless engagements throughout the Clone Wars, and yet Sidious dispatched them as if they posed no real threat. Facing this same opponent, Mace not only stood his ground, but pushed forward until he eventually disarmed the Sith Lord and backed him toward the window with a blade at his throat. George Lucas even confirmed in Revenge of the Sith's director commentary that Mace was overpowering Palpatine during their duel, and the novelization establishes that Mace's mastery of Vaapad gave him a unique edge against the Sith Lord. This matters significantly when evaluating the events that followed, because it establishes that Mace was operating at the absolute peak of his abilities at that moment. Yet even at this peak, Mace couldn't account for what happened next. Anakin arrived to find Mace preparing to execute the Sith Lord, and when Mace declared Palpatine too dangerous to remain alive, Anakin made his fateful choice by severing the Jedi Master's sword hand with his own lightsaber. The moment Mace lost his weapon, Palpatine dropped any pretense of weakness, rose to his feet, and hit the disarmed Jedi with force lightning that sent him crashing through the window and out into the stormy Coruscant sky. This is where most assume Mace met his end, but the evidence tells a different story when examined closely, starting with the lightning itself. Counting through the scene frame by frame reveals that Mace was exposed to the blast for approximately 6 seconds before going through the glass. That sounds devastating, but other characters have survived far worse under similar circumstances. Luke Skywalker, after all, endured Palpatine's lightning for over 20 seconds in Return of the Jedi, suffering multiple sustained bursts that left him convulsing and barely conscious on the throne room floor. Yet despite that prolonged assault, Luke not only survived, but retained enough strength afterward to drag his father across the entire hangar bay to a shuttle. By comparison, the lightning that supposedly ended Mace was far shorter in duration, and if Luke could survive 20 seconds, then 6 seconds of exposure raises serious questions about whether that alone could have proven fatal to someone of Mace's exceptional power level. Adding to this analysis is what Mace demonstrated just moments earlier in that same confrontation. During the duel, before Anakin's intervention, Mace blocked Palpatine's lightning with his lightsaber and redirected that energy back at the Sith Lord with such tremendous force that it permanently scarred and deformed Palpatine's face. If Mace could channel and redirect lightning while armed, his body clearly possessed some capacity to handle that type of destructive power, which suggests he may have had internal defenses against electrical damage that other Force users lack entirely. But what about the fall itself? This presents both the biggest challenge to survival and, surprisingly, the most hope for it. Palpatine's office sat in 500 Republica, one of the tallest residential towers on Coruscant, with the building standing at roughly 1,000 stories above the planet's surface levels. A straight, uninterrupted fall from that height would mean dropping nearly 2 miles before impact, which, under normal circumstances, would prove fatal regardless of force ability or physical conditioning. However, the planet isn't empty space between buildings, but an ecumenopolis, a city-covered world. According to Star Wars Complete Locations, Coruscant's cityscape extends 5,127 levels deep, with structures built on top of structures and platforms extending at every altitude. As for 500 Republica itself, Matthew Stover's Revenge of the Sith novelization describes it as the most exclusive address on Coruscant, while James Luceno's Labyrinth of Evil depicts it as a mountainous structure over 1,000 stories tall that housed senators, celebrities, and the galaxy's wealthiest individuals. The sky lanes around such a prestigious building would have been particularly congested at all hours. This geography changes the survival question, because falling from that window didn't mean plummeting through a void. It meant falling through one of the busiest airspaces in the entire galaxy, a crowded, three-dimensional highway stretching from the top of the city to its depths, where the descent could potentially be interrupted at countless points by passing vehicles, landing platforms, or architectural features extending from nearby structures. The most overlooked evidence supporting this possibility comes from the scene's audio itself. When Mace goes through the window, he makes a distinct sound, and listening carefully reveals a grunt or yell that's clearly audible. This detail matters far more than most realize, because unconscious people don't vocalize, and neither do those who have already succumbed to their injuries. That sound confirms Mace was still conscious and fully aware as he began his descent, which means he had the capacity to act during the fall and potentially save himself. His body language reinforces this interpretation, as he appears tense and reactive rather than limp and lifeless while exiting the frame, with his muscles engaged and his body clearly responding to what's happening rather than falling like dead weight. If Mace remained conscious during the fall, several specific survival mechanisms become plausible, each aligning perfectly with established canon. The speeder traffic scenario is the most straightforward of these possibilities. If Mace remained aware during the fall, multiple intervention options existed within that congested airspace. He could have landed on a passing speeder, grabbed onto one as it flew beneath him, or used the Force to pull a nearby vehicle toward his trajectory. Any of these options would have been painful and potentially caused serious injuries, but they would have stopped his descent long before reaching the surface miles below. This exact scenario has direct precedent in canon that proves the concept works. During the chase scene in Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan Kenobi fell through Coruscant's sky lanes after the assassin droid he was clinging to was destroyed, plummeting for a considerable distance through the busy airspace until Anakin swooped in and intercepted him with a speeder at the last possible moment. What's notable here is that the fall didn't harm Obi-Wan at all once it was interrupted, as he landed in the vehicle and continued the chase immediately. This clearly demonstrates that Coruscant's dense traffic can effectively serve as a safety net for falling Jedi under the right circumstances. And if Obi-Wan could survive such a fall through speeder intervention, Mace certainly could as well. The Force-assisted landing scenario draws on abilities that Jedi have demonstrated throughout canon material over the years. Telekinesis can slow falls by pushing against air or nearby surfaces, creating resistance that reduces speed during descent. While Force users can also redirect their momentum and control their trajectory to some degree, effectively steering themselves towards safer landing spots rather than simply dropping straight down. The key point here is that Mace wouldn't have needed to stop himself completely in midair to survive, since that kind of sustained hovering would be extraordinarily difficult even for him. But even partial deceleration would have changed the outcome dramatically, as slowing from terminal velocity to half that speed would make the difference between fatal impact and survivable injuries. Given Mace's exceptional power level, which canon consistently identifies as second only to Yoda in the entire Order, he would have had Force reserves available that most other Jedi simply couldn't match under similar circumstances. In addition to that, the architectural intervention scenario also relies on Coruscant's unique structural density rather than active Force use. Mace didn't necessarily need to survive a fall all the way to the ground to walk away from that night, but simply needed to intercept something on the way down, whether that meant grabbing a ledge as he fell past it, landing on a platform extending from a nearby building, or impacting a lower structure at an angle that distributed the Force across his body rather than concentrating it in a single devastating blow. Any of these outcomes would have caused injuries, possibly quite severe ones depending on the speed and angle of impact, but they wouldn't necessarily prove fatal for someone with Force-enhanced durability who could partially control their landing through telekinesis. What makes these scenarios even more compelling is what didn't happen in the aftermath. The Empire spent years systematically hunting every Jedi survivor across the galaxy following Order 66, with Vader personally tracking Force sensitives while the Inquisitors scoured the Outer Rim for anyone who escaped the initial purge. Yet despite this thorough campaign, no source in canon mentions anyone recovering Mace Windu's remains from the lower levels of Coruscant, and no confirmation of his fate was ever issued. For such an important figure who had just defeated the Emperor himself in combat, that silence is highly unusual. If Mace had fallen to his end that night, the Empire would have had every reason to recover and display his body as proof that the Jedi's greatest warrior had been vanquished. The fact that no such confirmation ever emerged suggests that canon is intentionally preserving ambiguity about what actually happened, leaving room for the possibility that Mace intercepted his fall through one of these very mechanisms and disappeared into the depths of Coruscant before anyone could find him. Yet Mace mastered Vaapad without falling. He walked the razor edge between light and dark with every single fight, channeling darkness while firmly remaining anchored to the light side through mental discipline that most Jedi couldn't even imagine attempting. This balance suggests a level of self-control and Force mastery that few beings in galactic history ever achieved. And more importantly for our question, it means that if survival required tapping into reserves of will and power beyond normal limits, Mace had access to depths that most Jedi simply couldn't reach. The application of Shatterpoint to his survival scenario is direct. If a path to safety existed during those critical seconds of falling, this ability would have revealed it instantly. Whether it was a speeder trajectory he could intercept, a platform below he could reach, or a precise moment where using the Force could change his fate, Mace would have known immediately if survival was possible, and exactly what actions he needed to take. No other falling Jedi would have possessed this advantage. Moreover, Jackson's comment about Jedi being able to float wasn't merely a joke for television audiences either, because telekinesis is a well-documented ability that can slow falls and redirect momentum. We've seen Force users push against surfaces throughout canon, slowing their descents and controlling their movement through the air with remarkable precision. Cal Kestis, in the Jedi video games for instance, regularly uses Force slow to survive falls that should otherwise prove fatal. Yet his power level sits far below what Mace possessed at the height of his abilities. The logic follows naturally. If a surviving Padawan still reconnecting with the Force could manage these techniques, a master of Mace's caliber could certainly accomplish the same with far greater effectiveness. Then there's Tutaminis, a Force ability that allows users to absorb and redirect energy through the body. Mace demonstrated this capability directly during his duel with Palpatine, channeling lightning through his blade and sending it back with such devastating effect that the redirected energy scarred the Sith Lord permanently. A Jedi with that level of energy manipulation might well possess internal defenses against electrical damage that other Force users lack, which could explain how he endured the lightning blast before going through the window. Taken together, these abilities paint a picture of someone uniquely equipped for survival. Vaapad gave him mental discipline and access to power beyond normal limits, while Shatterpoint would have revealed any available path to safety. His raw power level meant he possessed Force reserves most couldn't match. Telekinesis could slow his descent through the crowded Coruscant airspace, and Tutaminis suggested resistance to the very energy that struck him. No other Jedi in the Order possessed this exact combination of capabilities, which means that if anyone could survive what happened that night, it was Mace Windu specifically. Beyond Mace's individual abilities, Star Wars itself has established a clear pattern when it comes to seemingly fatal situations. Characters survive far more often than logic would suggest. This pattern has repeated so many times across the franchise that it's becoming almost expected, and the examples throughout canon make Mace's potential survival fit within established storytelling conventions rather than breaking them. Star Wars has established that characters can survive far worse, and the franchise is filled with examples that put Mace's situation into perspective. Darth Maul, for instance, was cut in half at the waist by Obi-Wan Kenobi and fell down a reactor shaft on Naboo, injuries that should have been instantly fatal by any reasonable measure. Yet, he returned in the Clone Wars after surviving for years on a junk planet called Lothal Minor, kept alive through sheer hatred and his connection to the dark side. Anakin Skywalker's fate on Mustafar was equally horrific, as he lost 3 limbs and burned alive on the banks of a lava river, with injuries so severe that Obi-Wan left him for dead without hesitation. The revelation a decade later that Anakin had survived shocked Obi-Wan, despite having witnessed the injuries firsthand. Moreover, Palpatine himself endured his own reflected lightning for approximately 15 seconds during that very duel, far longer than the 6 seconds Mace suffered, was thrown down an exploding reactor shaft in what appeared to be certain death in Return of the Jedi, only for the Rise of Skywalker to reveal he had survived. If Obi-Wan could be wrong about Anakin's fate after watching him burn alive, and Palpatine could survive both extended lightning exposure and an exploding reactor core, then Mace surviving a fall through Coruscant's trafficked airspace seems entirely plausible. However, while the evidence strongly supports survival, intellectual honesty demands addressing the counter-arguments and acknowledging the genuine challenges Mace faced that night. The physical trauma was severe and shouldn't be minimized. If Mace fell all the way to Coruscant's lower levels without any interruption, that drop would almost certainly prove fatal regardless of force ability. The lightning could have caused cardiac arrest or severe muscle seizure, potentially leaving him physically unable to act during the descent, even if he remained mentally aware. The amputation of his hand added immediate shock and significant blood loss to his already compromised condition. And the combination of all of these traumas occurring simultaneously might have overwhelmed even someone operating at his exceptional power level. Beyond the physical obstacles, there's also the psychological dimension to account for. Mace had just experienced one of the most devastating betrayals in Jedi history, as the young man he had reluctantly trained and mentored for over a decade chose to side with the Sith Lord over him. That kind of emotional trauma can affect even the strongest minds, potentially disrupting the concentration needed to execute force techniques during a desperate fall. Mace had also just discovered that Palpatine, whom the Jedi Council had trusted and worked alongside for years, had been the phantom Sith Lord manipulating the entire Clone Wars from within the Republic's highest office. The weight of failure, realizing he had walked past the enemy countless times without sensing the truth, may have shaken his confidence in ways that affected his ability to respond in those critical seconds. The narrative function of his apparent end also presents challenges to survival theories. His fall served specific story purposes within the larger saga, marking Anakin's point of no return on his path to becoming Vader, while enabling Palpatine's rise to absolute power without meaningful Jedi opposition. If Mace survived, difficult questions immediately arise that the story has never attempted to answer. Why didn't he intervene during the Empire's 2 decades of tyrannical rule? Or, better yet, why didn't he attempt to contact Yoda or Obi-Wan, both of whom survived the Purge and went into hiding on remote worlds? However, these questions have potential answers that actually strengthen the survival theory rather than weaken it. Mace may have recognized that his direct involvement in Anakin's fall made him uniquely unsuited to confront Vader, since any encounter would force both men to relive that traumatic moment in Palpatine's office. He may have sensed through the Force that the galaxy's liberation would come through Luke Skywalker, rather than through the old guard of the Jedi Order, and that his interference could disrupt that destiny. Most compellingly, Mace may have concluded that the Jedi's aggressive approach to the Sith, the very approach he championed by attempting to execute Palpatine rather than arrest him, had contributed to the Order's destruction. Going into exile to meditate on these failures would align perfectly with how Yoda and Obi-Wan responded to the same catastrophe. These counter-arguments don't definitively prove Mace is gone, but they do explain why Canon hasn't confirmed his survival, despite having numerous opportunities to do so over the past 2 decades. What makes the question so compelling is the official position on Mace Windu's fate, which is notable precisely because there isn't one. Lucasfilm has maintained intentional ambiguity since Revenge of the Sith premiered in 2005, refusing to close the door despite countless chances to do so. Moreover, recent developments suggest that flexibility may finally be getting used. Reports from Empire magazine reveal that Jackson has moved beyond public advocacy into active lobbying behind closed doors at Disney. Additionally, director Bryce Dallas Howard confirmed on the Happy Sad Confused podcast that after Jackson expressed interest in working with her, she went straight to Dave Filoni and asked directly about Mace Windu's fate. The fact that a Star Wars director has actively discussed bringing back the character with Lucasfilm's chief creative officer transforms this from mere fan speculation into a practical possibility at the studio level. These aren't rumors from anonymous sources anymore, but confirmed conversations happening among the people who actually make decisions about Star Wars content. On the other hand, Lucasfilm's continued silence stands in sharp contrast to how the studio handles characters whose fates are truly settled. Qui-Gon Jinn's funeral pyre left no room for doubt about his physical fate, while Padme Amidala's body was displayed in an open casket during her funeral procession. Even characters who returned from apparent demise, like Palpatine and Maul, eventually received explicit canonical confirmation of their survival. For Mace alone, the studio has maintained 2 decades of intentional ambiguity, neither confirming his end nor revealing his survival, which suggests they're preserving the option for a reason. After examining every angle of this question, did Mace Windu actually survive that fateful night above Coruscant? His mastery of the Force, proven resilience, and the precedents set by others who survived similar situations all point toward a strong possibility. Perhaps someday a new project will finally settle the question once and for all, confirming whether one of the most powerful Jedi who ever lived actually died that night or found a way to survive.
But before any of that mystery can be settled, the question that came first is how he ever managed to win the duel at all. The Sith Lord he faced had outmaneuvered every other Jedi the Order put in front of him.
Form 7 is called Juyo, and it's described as the most difficult and demanding of all forms. Only high-level masters trained in multiple forms could even attempt it. This was because Juyo drew on a deeper well of emotion than any other fighting style. Its unpredictable, rapid attacks were designed to overwhelm opponents through pure aggressive intensity. Most Jedi try to block out the dark side. They center themselves in the light, maintain emotional control, and fight defensively to avoid drawing on anger or aggression. That is the traditional Jedi approach, and it works against most opponents. But against a Sith Lord, someone who embodies the dark side, who channels pure hatred and rage as a weapon, that defensive approach has a problem. You fight against the current, while Vaapad does the opposite. The same novel explains that using Vaapad requires a Jedi to accept the enemy's furious speed. Instead of resisting it, the Jedi draws the opponent's rage and power into their inner center, then releases it back outward. In this process, the Jedi becomes half of what the book calls a superconducting loop. The other half of the loop is the dark side itself. Imagine Palpatine channeling his hatred, rage, and raw Sith power into every strike. Against a normal Jedi, that level of darkness would be a clear advantage. Against Vaapad, however, that power flows through Windu and is reflected straight back at him. The harder Palpatine attacks, the stronger Windu becomes, as the circuit completes itself. Jedi vs. Sith, the essential guide to the Force, confirms this makes Vaapad the perfect counter to someone like Palpatine. But there's a cost to walking this line between light and dark. Labyrinth of Evil describes Vaapad as a technique of dark flirtation that very few Jedi have the discipline to control. The book notes that while many Jedi Masters understood the necessity of pushing boundaries in warfare, very few possess the inner discipline required. Mace Windu was one of the only Jedi self-composed enough to walk that line without falling. The Shatterpoint novel reveals that Mace developed Vaapad to answer his own inner darkness. He had to learn to channel his own potential for violence, his own capacity for aggression, and transform it into a weapon of the light. The novel explains that to use Vaapad, he must give himself over to the thrill of battle, enjoying the fight, and the satisfaction of winning. That kind of mindset is exactly what the Jedi Code warns against, but Mace found a way to use it without being consumed by it. That's why he's the only living master of Vaapad in the entire galaxy. Jedi vs. Sith, The Essential Guide to the Force, confirms he was one of only 2 confirmed practitioners of Form 7 at all, and his specific variant was so personal, so tied to his own internal balance, that it couldn't be safely taught to most other Jedi. But having the perfect weapon against a Sith Lord means nothing if you can't see where to aim it, and that's where Mace possessed something even rarer than his mastery of Vaapad. Reason number 2 is the vision that sees where everything breaks, a rare Force ability called Shatterpoint awareness. This gift meant he could see the structural weak points in situations, the precise fault lines where one decisive strike can shift everything. In Legends, this concept gets fully developed into something that explains how Mace could see even what Yoda could not. The Shatterpoint novel provides Mace's own description of his gift. He sees the world as shot through with flaws and fault lines of possibility. When he looks at something through the Force, whether it's a person, an object, or an entire war, he can find the shear planes that will cause them to break in useful ways. The novel shows that when Mace looks at a battlefield, he doesn't just see tactics. He sees which soldier, which moment, which decision will collapse the entire enemy position. The text identifies Palpatine early as a critical Shatterpoint, a figure on whom the future of the Republic, perhaps the entire galaxy, depends. Mace doesn't know yet that Palpatine is Darth Sidious, but he senses that everything revolves around the Chancellor in ways that aren't natural, that don't feel right in the Force. During the duel itself, Mace's mind is working on multiple levels. While his body fights, his consciousness slides along the circuit of dark power, searching. The text describes him feeling for Palpatine's Shatterpoint, the absolute weakness hidden beneath all that Sith power. In the novel, Mace discovers Palpatine's Shatterpoint, described as the absolute Shatterpoint of the Sith, the fracture at the heart of the dark side itself. And that weakness comes down to one staggering realization. Palpatine trusts Anakin Skywalker. The entire Sith plan, 1,000 years of revenge and manipulation, depends on Anakin's loyalty. That trust is the crack in Palpatine's armor. But Shatterpoint doesn't just show you the weakness. The Shatterpoint novel makes it clear that it shows you the exact moment when that weakness can be exploited. These moments are described as ephemeral, appearing for a bare instant. You either strike then, or you lose the opportunity forever. When Mace walks into the Chancellor's office with 3 other Jedi Masters, he's not just attempting an arrest. In his perception, this confrontation is the Shatterpoint of the entire Clone War. If he breaks Palpatine here, the Sith's plan collapses, the war ends, and the Republic survives. With absolute certainty through the Force, Mace understands that this single moment in the room will decide the fate of trillions. That is what Shatterpoint awareness truly means, and in canon, Mace is the only Jedi of his era who possesses this gift at that level. Yoda sees the future as clouded by the dark side, while Obi-Wan treats the Force as a guide rather than a map. Anakin holds immense power but lacks clarity. Mace, by contrast, sees the breaking point. And once you see where something will break, you cannot unsee it or hesitate, because that moment of weakness will not wait while you debate, consult, or search for another path. This is why Mace's approach to the duel is so different from how other Jedi would handle it. He's not going into that office hoping for a peaceful resolution. He's not preparing to take a prisoner for trial. He's walking into the Shatterpoint of galactic history, and he knows with Force-enhanced certainty that if he doesn't strike true, the moment will pass and the Sith will win. But seeing the weak point isn't enough. You have to be willing to strike it, and that required something even rarer than Force gifts or lightsaber mastery. It required a mindset that pushed Mace Windu into a place no other Jedi was willing to go. The third reason is mindset, which other Jedi couldn't match, starting with Yoda, the Grand Master and spiritual leader of the Order, the wisest Jedi in centuries. The Star Wars Episode III Revenge of the Sith junior novelization shows that Yoda eventually fights Palpatine in the Senate chamber, and he admits afterward that he failed. Not because he lacked power, but because his entire approach to the Force was rooted in an older time. The novel describes Yoda recognizing that the new Sith couldn't be destroyed with a lightsaber, that they couldn't be burned away by any torch of the Force. He lost before he started because his philosophy couldn't adapt to what Palpatine had become. As depicted in the film, when he confronts Sidious in the Senate, the symbolism is overwhelming. Palpatine throws Senate pods at him, literally weaponizing the Republic itself. Yoda is fighting in Palpatine's political throne room, surrounded by the institution Palpatine is already corrupted. Obi-Wan Kenobi is consistently portrayed as cautious in Labyrinth of Evil, and his fighting style, Soresu, or Form 3, reflects that restraint with its strong focus on defense. That approach is his greatest strength in most situations, but against Palpatine, that defensive mindset becomes a fatal weakness. More importantly, Obi-Wan is fundamentally compassionate. The Revenge of the Sith shows that when he fights Vader on Mustafar, he refuses to deliver a killing blow even when he has the chance. The novel describes his heart as shattered, broken by betrayal. He tells Anakin that he was like a brother. That attachment means Obi-Wan could never walk into Palpatine's office with the intent to execute him. Anakin commands raw potential power greater than any Jedi before him, but the junior novelization makes clear that by the time of the office scene, Anakin is completely emotionally compromised. He's desperate to save Padme from the death he saw in his visions. Palpatine has spent years grooming him, feeding his fears, positioning himself as the only one who can offer the power Anakin needs. A fair fight between Anakin and Palpatine never happens because Palpatine made sure it wouldn't. This is where his ruthless mindset separates him from every other Jedi. Labyrinth of Evil records Mace explicitly stating that the Jedi's deference to Palpatine has to end. While other council members are still debating political implications, still worried about the optics of moving against the Supreme Chancellor, Mace sees the situation with absolute clarity. The Sith Lord must be rooted out and eliminated. The junior novelization confirms that when Mace walks into that office, he tells Palpatine he's under arrest. But the moment Palpatine ignites his lightsaber and kills 3 Jedi Masters in seconds, something shifts. When Anakin arrives and finds Mace standing over the defeated Sith Lord, Mace tells him plainly that Palpatine has too much control over the Senate and the courts, that he is too dangerous to be kept alive. This is the voice of someone shaped by war, who has learned that some threats cannot be safely handled by laws or ideals alone. The Shatterpoint novel provides context for why Mace thinks this way. It describes his cultural background. He's Corran, and the Corran people follow 4 pillars: honor, duty, family, and herd. The herd, the community, the greater good, is the highest pillar. Yoda observes that for Mace, the Republic is his herd. And if the well-being of that herd requires the sacrifice of your personal honor, you do it. That is the key difference. Yoda would not compromise his principles. Obi-Wan, not his compassion. Anakin, not his desires. Mace Windu would sacrifice anything, including his own soul, if it meant saving the Republic. After the Battle of Geonosis, Mace reflects on his choice to spare Count Dooku while standing on the balcony. He feels deep regret, wondering whether ending Dooku's life then might have prevented the war. It's a rare instance of a Jedi Master questioning the value of mercy in hindsight, and it highlights a mindset that feels distinct from how Yoda or Obi-Wan typically approach such decisions. Jedi vs. Sith, The Essential Guide to the Force, records Jedi instructor Sindralig taught that when facing a Sith Lord, a Jedi should not hesitate to use any combat technique necessary to kill them, because Sith Lords who are allowed to survive will always find a way to turn the situation to their advantage. Mace Windu internalized that lesson in a way no other council member did. Labyrinth of Evil contrasts the Jedi's general approach by noting they're obsessed with bringing enemies to justice instead of merely administering justice themselves. But Mace breaks that pattern. He's willing to be judge, jury, and executioner when the situation demands it. Palpatine's greatest weapon is emotional manipulation. He plays on Anakin's fear, provokes Yoda into a symbolic battle in the Senate chamber, and positions himself as a helpless old man persecuted by religious zealots. But as shown in the Revenge of the Sith novelization, When Mace stands over Palpatine with his lightsaber raised, ready to strike, none of that matters. Mace isn't impressed by political power. He doesn't care about Palpatine's public image and is immune to emotional manipulation because he has already made his decision based on cold strategic necessity. The text describes Mace's mindset clearly. He knows the duel is decided and prepares to kill Palpatine. That ruthless clarity, that absolute conviction that this is the moment and this is what must be done, is something only Mace Windu possessed among all Jedi. So when the duel finally begins, Mace isn't just another Jedi attempting an arrest. He's a weapon specifically designed to kill a Sith Lord at the exact moment it matters most. He has the style, the perception, and the mindset to do what no one else can. The confrontation in Palpatine's office proves everything we've discussed. Ultimate Star Wars confirms Mace Windu selects 3 other Jedi Masters to accompany him: Agen Kolar, Kit Fisto, and Saesee Tiin. When they arrive, Mace announces they're placing Palpatine under arrest, and as shown in the film and the novelization, Palpatine's response is immediate and devastating. He reveals a hidden lightsaber and springs into action. The same source confirms he kills all 3 accompanying Jedi Masters in seconds. The New Essential Chronology describes them as crumpled on the floor almost before anyone can react. This opening blitz serves a critical purpose in understanding Mace's achievement. Palpatine's speed is described in the novelization as barely visible, a blur of motion and red light. His power is overwhelming, and 3 experienced, skilled Jedi Masters, all Council-level warriors, lasted less than 5 seconds. That alone shows just how dangerous Sidious is in a straight duel, yet Mace does not die. The novelization reveals that after that initial onslaught, the duel shifts. Gradually, it becomes more balanced, and Mace begins to push Palpatine back. Vaapad is central to this moment, as the novel frames the fight from Mace's perspective and explains how he draws in Palpatine's fury and sends it back through the form, much like deflecting a blaster bolt. As the fight continues, they crash through the window area, fighting across the ledge, and eventually, Mace drives Palpatine onto the window edge and disarms him. The Sith Lord's lightsaber is gone. Palpatine is on the floor, and Mace is standing over him, blade close to his throat. This is the image that defines the entire fight. Ultimate Star Wars notes that Mace seemingly was winning against Palpatine. The text describes the Sith Lord as physically defeated in the duel, needing help to survive. The question everyone asks is whether Palpatine staged his defeat or whether Mace Windu truly beat him. The novelization is clear that Mace wins the lightsaber duel. It describes victory flooding through him, with no doubt and no trick. In pure blade combat, Mace overwhelms Palpatine, disarms him, and stands in a winning position. There is no hint that Mace is being fooled during the fight itself. By the rules of a lightsaber duel, Mace Windu wins. Both the film and the novelization agree on this point. What happens next is where Palpatine takes control again. The moment Anakin arrives, Palpatine changes tactics. He stops fighting like a warrior and starts acting like a victim. He uses Force Lightning, lets it reflect back through Vaapad, and allows himself to look weak and ancient. The novelization and junior novelization describe his voice turning frail as he begs for mercy. This is a performance meant for Anakin, and it works. Anakin sees a Jedi about to kill an unarmed man without trial. Mace, however, does not waver. He states that Palpatine controls the courts and the Senate and is too dangerous to live. Then he raises his blade, proving that while Palpatine plays for Anakin, Mace is focused only on ending the Sith Lord for good. That's the moment Anakin betrays him. The New Essential Chronology records Anakin panics, believing the knowledge to save Padme will die with Palpatine. He does not fight Mace in a fair duel, and instead cuts off his sword hand from behind, a completely cheap shot. The moment Mace loses his weapon and his arm, Palpatine's weakness vanishes. The novelization describes him instantly flipping back to full power, blasting Mace out the window with sustained Force Lightning, while shouting about unlimited power. In a straight duel, Palpatine cannot put Mace Windu down. He needs Anakin to do it for him. The most powerful Sith Lord in galactic history, someone who manipulated the entire Republic and orchestrated a galaxy-wide war, cannot defeat this one Jedi in honest combat. To fully understand why Mace is unique, we need to see why the other two most powerful Jedi of the era failed where he succeeded. The junior novelization shows Yoda confronting Darth Sidious in the Senate chamber after the Jedi Temple massacre, and despite being equal to Palpatine in raw force power, Yoda loses. He admits his failure comes from arrogance and from being locked into an older way of thinking. The novel explains that the new Sith cannot be defeated with a lightsaber alone. Palpatine has changed the game by turning the Republic itself into a weapon. This is made clear in the film when they fight in the Senate chamber and Palpatine hurls Senate pods at Yoda, using democracy as a weapon. The new essential chronology confirms that Yoda cannot defeat the most powerful Sith Lord in history and is forced into exile. And the Revenge of the Sith novelization shows why. Yoda fights with restraint and moral limits, searching for the right and proper way to restore balance. Those traits make him a great Jedi, but against Palpatine, who has already corrupted every system Yoda believes in, they become the reason he fails. On paper, Anakin Skywalker should be unstoppable. Multiple sources describe him as having the potential to be the most powerful Force user ever, with raw ability that rivals or even surpasses Yoda. But the junior novelization makes it clear that by the time Palpatine is unmasked, Anakin is emotionally broken. He is haunted by visions of Padme dying in childbirth, and Palpatine has spent years feeding that fear while presenting himself as the only one who can prevent death through ancient Sith knowledge. Anakin has no doubt that Palpatine is the Sith Lord. According to the novel and the new essential chronology, he panics when he sees Mace about to kill Palpatine, fearing that the one chance to save Padme will die with him. That is why he betrays Mace, not out of loyalty to the Sith, but out of desperation and fear. Palpatine never allows a fair confrontation with a stable Anakin. His plan depends on keeping Anakin emotionally dependent and psychologically compromised, a pattern that continues even after Anakin becomes Darth Vader, as the novelization confirms Vader knows he can never truly challenge the Emperor's power. Mace Windu was the only Jedi who had both the power and the clarity to do what needed to be done. As established in Jedi vs. Sith, the essential guide to the Force, Mace could use Vaapad to channel darkness without being consumed. The Shatterpoint novel confirms he could see the exact weak point where one strike would collapse the enemy's entire position. And the Revenge of the Sith novelization shows that he had the ruthless pragmatism to recognize that some threats cannot be imprisoned or redeemed and can only be eliminated. That's why he's the only Jedi who actually beat Palpatine in a straight fight. And that's exactly why Palpatine had to make sure that even when Mace won, he still lost. Mace Windu was able to defeat Palpatine because of a rare combination no other Jedi possessed. His lightsaber form, Vaapad, turned the Sith Lord's greatest strength, his dark side power, into a liability, creating what Revenge of the Sith and legend sources like Jedi vs. Sith, the essential guide to the Force, described as a superconducting loop that fed Palpatine's rage back at him. Every strike Sidious made only strengthened Mace, a balance no other Jedi could maintain without falling. On top of that, Shatterpoint gave Mace the ability to see exactly where events would break, a power detailed in the Shatterpoint novel, and the Clone Wars character encyclopedia joined the battle. He recognized Palpatine as the central weakness holding the entire war together and knew the precise moment decisive action was required. Finally, sources like Labyrinth of Evil and the novelization show that Mace had the ruthless clarity to accept that some threats could not be redeemed or contained. In a straight fight, with no hesitation and no illusions, canon and legends present one clear answer to who could beat Palpatine in combat: Mace Windu.
That night was the climax of his life. The full path that brought him to the Chancellor's office, from the volcanic mountains of his birth planet to the seat beside Yoda on the Council, runs longer and stranger than most fans realize. Haruun Kal was a planet where survival was earned, never guaranteed. The surface lay drowned beneath a toxic sea of volcanic gases called the Cloud Sea, and only the mountain peaks rising above this barrier could sustain life. The native human population, known as the Kodunai, lived as nomadic herders in the treacherous highlands, where predators like branch leopards, vine cats, and fever wasps made every journey a gamble. It was here, on a world whose name translated to above the clouds, that Mace Windu was born. The Kodunai were remarkable because every member of their population was Force sensitive. As recounted in Shatterpoint, Jedi scholars trace the Kodunai lineage back roughly 4,000 years to the Great Sith War, when a starship carrying Jedi Knights reportedly crashed on the planet, and the stranded survivors eventually became the ancestors of the Kodunai people. They organized into extended family clans called Ghosh, and Windu was born into the Ghosh Windu. Carvaster, a fierce warrior who shared his deep connection to the Force, was also of Ghosh Windu, making the two men clan brothers from birth. But before Windu ever held a lightsaber, his homeworld had already begun shaping him. Kodan culture was built on 4 pillars: honor, duty, family, and herd, with honor ranked highest, demanding honesty, bravery, and integrity above all else. The Kodunai used their Force abilities to bond with Akdogs, powerful predators that served as companions and protectors, and Grassers, the massive creatures they herded across the highland plateaus. The planet had a tragically high mortality rate among its children, and only the strongest survived the harsh conditions of the highlands. Windu's parents perished in the jungles when he was only 6 months old, leaving him alone before he could even speak. Jedi anthropologists had been studying the Kodunai, fascinated that an entire population could touch the Force. They asked the Windu clan if they might take the child back to the Jedi Order, and since his parents were already gone, the clan agreed. He had not yet reached his naming day, so the Order gave him the name he carried for the rest of his life as he entered the academy on Coruscant. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was the largest training center in the galaxy, housing thousands of younglings, Padawans, knights, and masters within its ancient halls. For the boy from the harsh world, the temple offered structure, education, and the closest thing to family he would ever know. But unlike many of his fellow younglings who took comfort in the temple's safety, young Windu approached his training with an intensity that unsettled his teachers. He did not play, but instead prepared relentlessly, and that seriousness drew attention early. Where other Jedi approached the Force with wonder, this boy approached it with gravity. The world Windu came from was one where danger was constant and losing focus could prove fatal, and this forged in him a survival mindset from infancy. Even though he was too young to remember Haruun Kal consciously, the Force-sensitive boy carried its imprint in his being. Unlike many younglings who arrived at the temple from peaceful worlds, the Kodan boy entered the Order already primed for watchfulness, control, and the discipline that would define him. This lesson was bred into his bones by a world of poisonous clouds and predatory jungles. That survival instinct shaped every choice he made as a Jedi, and it fed a fear of chaos rooted so deeply that he could never fully separate caution from control. It was both his greatest powerful asset and the seed of what critics eventually called his rigidity. Where other Jedi might approach training with playfulness, young Windu treated each exercise as preparation for something urgent. Yet the temple's instructors quickly realized that this boy from the harsh world carried far more than training, a volatile fire burning beneath the surface that none of them had seen in a youngling before. And it would take a rare and extraordinary Force ability to reveal just how different Mace Windu was from every other student in the Order, an ability that would change how he saw the galaxy and everything in it. Chapter 2: The Boy Who Saw Shatterpoints. However, the temple's training halls soon reveal something about young Windu that nobody had expected. Like all younglings, the Kodan boy received instruction from Grandmaster Yoda himself during his earliest years. Even among the gifted children who filled the Jedi Temple, Windu stood apart. He carried intense emotions, a fire that burned inside him hotter and more volatile than what most younglings possessed. His instructor noticed this intensity early on, and it set him apart from his peers in ways that were not always comfortable for anyone involved. At a young age, the boy discovered a rare Force ability, and that is, he could perceive Shatterpoints. This was not an ordinary sight, but a deep perception of how things connected within the Force, and how the Force bound them to themselves and to all things around them. Shatterpoints reveal critical junctions that other things depended upon. If identified and acted upon, these weak points could hold the key to averting disaster, winning battles, or fulfilling the will of the Force itself. Then he realized something that changed how he saw himself and every Jedi around. As recounted in the Legends novel Shatterpoint, Windu was 6 or 7 standard years old before he understood that other students, full-grown knights, and even wise masters could only sense these connections with great difficulty and concentration. The Force showed him strengths and weaknesses, hidden flaws, and unexpected uses, and vectors of stress that squeezed, stretched, or sheared. When he looked at someone through the Force, he could see where they would break. This ability sharpened his strategic mind from childhood. It also placed a heavy weight on him because knowing where things could break meant that he felt responsible to act when others hesitated, and to act correctly without exception. While other younglings approached their training with curiosity and play, the Cotton Boy treated each lesson as preparation for a crisis that could not afford mistakes. The seriousness that already defined him only deepened as his perception of the Force grew stronger. Still, the deeper struggle was not about power, but about what raged silently inside him. The Jedi Code taught peace and serenity as the natural state of a Force user, but young Windu's version was closer to restraint and constant suppression of strong currents running beneath the surface. He did not naturally arrive at peace. Windu fought for it against his own nature at all times. Where others found calm through surrender, the Cotton Boy found it only through control. And that difference set the pattern for his life. This was the central tension of his existence, the difference between genuine inner peace and the forceful containment of intense emotions that look like peace from the outside. His sense of right and wrong was strict, not cruel but unyielding. There were lines he believed should never be crossed, and he spent his youth building walls around each one of them. The boy from the harsh world was constructing his defenses early, and every wall he built made him stronger and more isolated at the same time. One of his early instructors was Sarasa, a member of the legendary Neti species of sapient mobile trees who helped train him during his formative years. The first time Windu managed to best one of his instructors came during a sparring match with Sa, who was surprised but respected his skill. During the same years, he also developed a long-lasting friendship with a fellow Jedi named Sora Bulk, a Weequay already considered one of the Order's finest lightsaber practitioners. That friendship would carry serious consequences for them both. However, despite his growing mastery of the Force and the respect he had earned from seasoned instructors, one challenge remained that frustrated the young Windu more than any other, and it involved his lightsaber, the one weapon whose construction tested not his strength or his intellect, but the one quality he found hardest to summon, the willingness to let go of control and simply trust the Force to guide what his hands alone can never assemble. Chapter 3: The Purple Blade. But building that weapon proved to be one of the hardest things he ever did. Despite his remarkable talent in the Force, the Cotton Boy famously struggled with the construction of his first lightsaber. In canon, the ancient architect droid Professor Huyang supervised his attempts and concluded that the youngling had neither the patience nor the correct understanding to complete the weapon. Huyang advised Windu to temper his emotions because a lightsaber's components never needed to be built in the traditional sense. A Jedi did not deliberately construct a lightsaber through force of will. Instead, they allowed the Force to guide the components together because the lightsaber was meant to be an extension of the Jedi themselves. This advice frustrated the intense young Windu, but it eventually helped him understand a basic truth about balance. Forcing things together through willpower alone was not the same as allowing them to come together through trust. The pieces were already whole, and they needed someone willing to let the Force bring them together. For Windu, this was the hardest lesson of his youth. His whole approach to the Force was built on control and decisive action, and the lightsaber construction process demanded the opposite. The boy needed to surrender his will to the Force and trust that the outcome would be correct. It went against every instinct the boy from Haruun Kal possessed. His eventual success did not erase the struggle, but it proved that he could learn to let go, even if letting go never came naturally. As recounted in the canon comic Age of Republic, this became his first real lesson. The frustration he felt was essential to his growth, though he could not see it at the time. As shown in Age of Republic Special Number 1, he eventually understood that he had struggled because he was trying to impose his will on the process rather than listening to the Force, and the instant he surrendered control was when the weapon finally came together. Within Legends lore, the origin of the blade's distinctive color carries even deeper meaning. According to the story Stones from Star Wars Tales number 13, young Windu had been having recurring visions of a specific lightsaber with a purple blade, despite never having held one. By age 14, he had still not yet completed a lightsaber despite his exceptional skill. Grandmaster Yoda understood that Windu wanted a challenge, and at Yoda's direction, the 14-year-old was sent alone to the planet Hurricane in wild space. Eventually, what started as a test of skill turned into a lasting lesson of compassion. Hurricane was inhabited by sentient beings made entirely of crystalline stone and purple minerals. The young Jedi was chased by the stone natives who saw him as an intruder, and confident in his abilities, he toyed with his pursuers as he evaded them. When one of the stone beings attempted to follow him across a canyon and plummeted to the ground, shattering its crystalline body on impact, the boy was horrified at what his recklessness had caused. Windu stopped fleeing immediately and painstakingly used the Force to reconstruct the shattered native, piece by piece, healing the being he had broken through his own carelessness. In gratitude for his mercy, the restored native presented Windu with the rare amethyst hurricane crystals, which possess unusual hardness and could produce lightsaber blades of extraordinary strength. With these crystals, the young Jedi built his signature weapon, a lightsaber that produced a distinctive violet blade, unlike any other in the Jedi Order. In canon, the crystal turned purple when it bonded with him during the construction process, as all kyber crystals are colorless until they connect with a Force user. The distinctive electrum plating on his lightsaber hilt gave the weapon a regal, golden appearance, fitting for a Jedi who walked an uncommon path. The purple blade stood as a symbol of his identity, balanced between the blue of Jedi Guardians and the red of aggression, representing a warrior who stood apart from the rest of the Order. Nevertheless, the crystal was not obtained through force, but through humility and the willingness to repair what had been broken. And that same lesson applied to far more than lightsaber construction, because on a plague-ravaged world where a fraud exploited the desperate, the young Padawan learned that the line between righteous justice and personal vengeance was dangerously thin, and terrifyingly easy to cross when emotions ran high and rage felt indistinguishable from righteousness. Chapter 4: Justice and Control. Yet that test came sooner than expected, on a mission that would establish his pattern. Following his trials as a youngling, Windu became the Padawan of Jedi Master Sizzlin Mir, a Mirialan who imparted upon her young apprentice a strong belief in the rule of law and the importance of measured justice. She taught him that the galaxy was full of injustice, but that a Jedi's response must always be tempered by wisdom and restraint, a principle that would define his character permanently. As depicted in a flashback from the canon Marvel comic Jedi of the Republic issue 4, a pivotal mission tested the young Padawan beyond combat. A man named Druz had taken residence in a Jedi outreach temple on the planet Mythos. With the local population suffering from the Niffin plague, Druz convinced the desperate people he was a Jedi prophet who could heal the sick in return for their faith and servitude. He was a fraud, and the Order dispatched Mir and her Padawan to bring him down. As they approached the temple, Windu observed the people suffering and was affected, not by the plague itself, but by how completely Druz had corrupted the trust these people had placed in someone they believed to be a Jedi. This was not a simple crime for the young Padawan. This was personal because Druz had taken the most sacred relationship in the galaxy, the bond between Jedi and the people they served, and twisted it into a tool for exploitation. However, the confrontation with Druz revealed a troubling impulse inside the young Padawan himself. Windu pursued the charlatan through the temple and defeated his bodyguards despite his youth, though Druz managed to wound his arm with a blaster. Using the Force to hold the man in place, Windu disarmed him, but his anger was building rapidly. The charlatan had corrupted trust exploited the desperate, and twisted the idea of what the Jedi stood for. Windu was ready to punish rather than arrest. Master Mir intervened and ordered Windu to lower his lightsaber before he crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Jedi do not decide outcomes alone, and they must never become judge, jury, and enforcer, no matter how righteous the anger feels in the moment. The line between justice and vengeance is crossed not through intent, but through action. Mir taught her Padawan to recognize when he was approaching that line and to stop himself before it was too late. It was a lesson he carried for the rest of his life. Then, Windu became a knight, and his career accelerated faster than anyone could have predicted. One of the most significant events of this period was his rescue of a young, orphan girl named Depa Billaba from space pirates. He took Depa as his Padawan, and she proved to be one of his most talented students, and one of the finest Jedi of her generation. Their relationship was deep, almost like that of a father and daughter, and the Koran Master was immensely proud of her achievements. As chronicled in the Canon Marvel comic Age of Republic Special No. 1, the Council deployed Windu to the Outer Rim planet of Uzalon due to attacks committed by the warlord Guatako. Windu deliberately allowed himself to be captured to discover the location of the warlord's hidden base, buried inside 80,000 kilometers of tunnels. Upon learning that Guatako's operation relied on kidnapped children forced to serve as soldiers, the Jedi Master tried to convince a child named Koya to abandon the insurgents, hoping to save them all. Guatako assumed his prisoner was helpless, a fatal miscalculation, as the Jedi Master used telekinesis to reassemble his weapon and fought his way free. The other Jedi arrived, and the remaining insurgents were taken into custody by Uzalon's security forces. Although they rescued 26 abducted children, Windu had hoped to save Koya and the child soldiers who were already a part of Guatako's cause. Yoda reminded him that the Jedi were forbidden from interfering in local affairs. Windu accepted the outcome, but wished he could have done more. At the age of 28, Windu became the youngest Jedi ever appointed to the Council. His wisdom and his words were considered legendary within the Order, and he was often regarded as second only to Grandmaster Yoda, despite being 8 centuries younger. Eventually, sometime before the Naboo Crisis, the Koran Master was elected as Master of the Order, the leader of the Jedi Council, and the overall second in command of the Jedi after the Grand Master. Windu's leadership faced further testing during the Yanchori Uprising, where the Jedi battled a Force-resistant species attempting to conquer nearby star systems. As depicted in the comic Acts of War, Windu deployed Jedi strike teams against the rebellion and personally led a team to the Yanchori home world. Because the Yanchori possessed a natural resistance to force manipulation, the Jedi Master had to rely more heavily on tactical planning and conventional combat strategy, skills that proved essential when the Clone Wars demanded military leadership. But the man who sat on the Council's highest seat carried a secret that none of his peers fully understood, because the darkness he had been fighting since childhood had never gone away. And instead of continuing to suppress it, the Koran Master decided to do something that no other Jedi in the Order's long history had ever attempted. And he would build a fighting style designed specifically to channel his own darkness and use it as a weapon. Chapter 5: Vaapad. When Windu looked inward and acknowledged that real darkness lived inside him, everything changed. Working alongside his old friend Sora Bulk, who was skilled in all 7 lightsaber forms, Windu drew inspiration from a predatory creature native to the planet Serapin, called the Vaapad, whose tentacles struck with blinding speed, moving so fast that they were impossible to count until the creature stopped moving entirely. Together, they developed a new variation of Form 7 named after this creature. Form 7, also known as Juyo, was the most vicious and demanding of all lightsaber combat styles. It drew heavily upon a practitioner's emotions to fuel dominance in combat, and due to its closeness to the dark side, it had been restricted and, at times, forbidden by the Council. Vaapad was Windu's modified version, a controlled channel where the practitioner accepted their own aggressive feelings and even drew upon the dark side energy of their opponent, turning it back against them. The user rode the edge between light and dark using aggression without surrendering to it. Vaapad users served as a conduit, creating what Shatterpoint describes as a superconducting loop in the Force. Dark energy flows in from the opponent, gets amplified by the Jedi's skills and their own darker impulses, and returns to the opponent with devastating force. In the Legends novelization of Revenge of the Sith, Anakin Skywalker once observed Windu's blade work and perceived it as a sphere of purple fire containing dozens of blades attacking from every angle simultaneously. Remarkably, every other practitioner who ever attempted the form was consumed by its pull. Sora Bulk, who had helped create Vaapad, grew fascinated by the dark side during its development. The darkness that Vaapad required its users to channel proved too seductive for Bulk to resist, and according to the Legends Mace Windu comic by Dark Horse, he gradually surrendered to the pull rather than learning to contain it. As Windu observed with bitter precision, Bulk did not master Vaapad, and instead, Vaapad mastered him completely. Depa Billaba also trained in Vaapad under his guidance and was considered nearly unbeatable in single combat. Her natural aptitude for the form impressed Windu, though he remained watchful, knowing that even the most talented practitioner could be consumed by its pull if their focus ever wavered. Quinlan Vos learned some Vaapad maneuvers from Bulk without Windu's knowledge, and when the Quoden Master recognized a Vaapad technique during a sparring match, he immediately warned Vos against its use, noting that the form could take the user dangerously close to the dark side. Yet Windu, alone among all practitioners, remained uncorrupted. The only true Vaapad master, Windu had looked into his own shadow, acknowledged its existence, designed a system to contain it, and maintained that system for decades without faltering. No other Jedi had managed to do anything comparable to Form 7. The discipline required formed the foundation of all he did as a leader, and it shaped how he viewed every Jedi who walked a less controlled path. His creation of Vaapad shaped his role on the Jedi Council. Because he understood darkness from the inside, Windu served as the personal guardian of tradition, the one who feared chaos most keenly because he knew from personal experience how easily order could shatter. His strict adherence to Jedi protocol, his intolerance for maverick behavior, his suspicion of emotional attachment, these were not the reflexes of a cold bureaucrat, but the discipline of a man who knew what would happen if the walls came down. In The Phantom Menace, Windu denied Qui-Gon's request to train the boy. Never patient with those who disobeyed the Council, the Quoden Master doubted the maverick Jedi Qui-Gon Jinn's belief that the ancient Sith had returned, and he thought little of Qui-Gon's insistence that young Anakin Skywalker was the chosen one. He sensed fear in the child and concluded that training him posed too great a risk. This initial assessment, whether it was wisdom or blindness, cast a long shadow over his relationship with Skywalker. After Qui-Gon fell at the hands of Darth Maul on Naboo, Windu accepted two truths he had resisted. The Sith had indeed returned, and Anakin Skywalker would be trained despite his objections. His distrust of the boy began the day that Qui-Gon brought him before the Council, and it never faded. According to the canon novel The Glass Abyss by Stephen Barnes, the Quoden Master received a final message from Qui-Gon, marked to be delivered upon his passing, containing a plea to help the Outer Rim planet Metagos. A violent solar flare had transformed the planet's surface into a landscape of irradiated glass, and the surviving inhabitants fled underground, where rival criminal clans fought to control the limited resources. Windu traveled there to fulfill his fallen colleague's last request, facing circumstances that pushed him to the boundaries of the Jedi Code while operating far from the Temple and Council politics. The mission tested his beliefs in ways that no amount of discipline had prepared him for, and then a war began that would test that resolve in ways he never imagined. Because the Jedi Order was about to be handed an army and told to fight, and the man who had spent decades mastering his own darkness would watch as the galaxy stripped his control away, one compromise at a time, hardening him into someone willing to do things that the Jedi he had been before the first shot was fired on Geonosis would never have recognized. Chapter 6: The Clone Wars. Then the Clone Wars erupted, and everything Mace Windu had built was tested to breaking. The 2024 Canon Marvel Comics miniseries Mace Windu by Mark Bernardin takes place before the war and showcases a younger Windu on early adventures that highlight his skills as an investigator and warrior before the Clone Wars changed him. 10 years after the Naboo crisis, the Separatist movement under Count Dooku had grown into a galactic threat. When Obi-Wan Kenobi was captured on Geonosis, Windu personally led a strike team of 212 Jedi to rescue him. During Attack of the Clones, during the chaos, the Codon Master struck down the infamous bounty hunter Jango Fett, the template for the entire clone army, with devastating precision. One clean swing of his purple blade ended the fight instantly. The Separatist forces overwhelmed his Jedi, and only the arrival of Yoda with the newly revealed clone army prevented total destruction. The galaxy was now at war, and the Jedi had been forced into an unfamiliar and perilous role as military generals commanding armies of clone troopers across dozens of fronts simultaneously. Shortly after Geonosis, Windu was tasked with investigating Separatist activity on a dark jungle planet. As depicted in the canon Marvel comic Jedi of the Republic, Windu selected 3 Jedi companions for the mission to Hisrich, including council member Kit Fisto, the blind but perceptive Prasid Dibs, and the newly knighted Risa Mano. They discovered a mercenary droid named ADW-4, hired by General Grievous, was harvesting energy-producing plants that could tip the war in the Separatist behavior, destroying the ecosystem and threatening the native population. During the mission, Prasid Dibs grew increasingly disillusioned. After discovering the remains of the people they'd been trying to protect, Dibs confronted Windu directly, accusing the Jedi Order of corrupting the Force by becoming soldiers. The confrontation escalated until Dibs ignited his lightsaber and attacked. Windu defeated him but chose mercy over lethal force, restraining him for the remainder of the mission and then defending him before the council, arguing that Dibs was as much a victim of the war as anyone else. Windu moved for Dibs' punishment to be confinement in the Jedi Library rather than expulsion from the Order. The council agreed, but Dibs accepted the sentence with bitter contempt, warning the Codon Master that his pride would be his downfall. The accusation stung because it carried a grain of truth. Windu's confidence in the Jedi Order's righteousness left no room for the possibility that Dibs might have a point, and the Codon Master dismissed the warning without a second thought, never considering that mercy alone might not be enough to reach someone already lost. Meanwhile, one of Windu's most celebrated military campaigns was the liberation of Ryloth itself. As shown in the Clone Wars episode Liberty on Ryloth, after Skywalker secured the space above and Kenobi took the southern hemisphere, Windu faced the final objective, retaking the capital city of Lezu, where Separatist Emir Wat Tambor had established his command center. Rather than a costly siege, the Jedi General sought the help of the Twi'lek Resistance under Cham Syndulla, and led a daring assault, crossing the Plasma Bridge with only 2 clone troopers. The liberation succeeded, and Windu earned the title of the Hammer of Ryloth among the Twi'lek people, a name that endured even when the Empire later tried to erase the Jedi from galactic history. The consequences of Geonosis also followed Windu in intensely personal ways. Young Boba Fett, the unaltered clone of Jango, harbored a burning desire for revenge. As shown in the Clone Wars, Boba infiltrated clone cadets aboard a Republic warship, planted a bomb in Windu's quarters, and sabotaged the reactor. Windu and Skywalker were lured to Vancor and nearly perished before rescue arrived. The attempted revenge showed that the consequences of Geonosis would follow the Codon Master for years. Boba Fett was a child driven by grief and rage, and Windu recognized the pattern because he had seen it in himself. The war was creating orphans and turning them into weapons, the cycle that the Jedi were supposed to prevent. With every new campaign, the distance between the peacekeepers the Jedi were meant to be and the generals they had become grew wider, and Windu felt that distance more acutely than most. As told in Shatterpoint, the war's most devastating chapter for Windu was deeply personal. The Council had sent his former Padawan Depa Billaba to Haruun Kal, Windu's birth world, to train the Kodonai as guerrilla fighters against the Separatist-aligned Balawai. All contact with Depa was lost, and a disturbing recording hinted she had fallen to the dark side. Windu traveled alone to the jungles of his home world that he barely remembered, searching for the woman who had been like a daughter to him. Deep in the wilderness, he found Depa corrupted by the horrors of the Summertime War and influenced by Kar Vaster, a dangerous force user of Mace Windu, his own clan. The woman who had been like a daughter to him had become someone he barely recognized. Windu defeated her in combat, and she was returned to Coruscant in a comatose state. The experience forced him to confront the true cost of sending people he cared about into war, a cost that no amount of Jedi discipline could absorb. In the Clone Wars micro-series by Genndy Tartakovsky, Windu's most spectacular feats were displayed during the Battle of Dantooine, where he single-handedly dismantled most of the Separatist droid army and destroyed their massive seismic tank without assistance. For a portion of the battle, the Jedi Master fought without his lightsaber, using Vaapad for unarmed combat, destroying droids with his bare hands, in sequences that showed how devastating his mastery of the form could be when fully unleashed against an army. As the war ground on relentlessly, Windu underwent a transformation that no amount of preparation could reverse, shifting from peacekeeper to someone willing to do things the Jedi would never have accepted before the conflict began, because the longer the fighting lasted and the more power Palpatine accumulated, the more convinced the Quarren Master became that the real threat to the Republic was not the Separatist armies on distant battlefields, but the man sitting in the Chancellor's office on Coruscant. Chapter 7: The Chancellor. By this stage of the war, Palpatine's influence over the Jedi Order had grown, making it impossible to ignore. The Supreme Chancellor had cultivated a private bond with Anakin Skywalker that bypassed the Council entirely, meeting with the young Jedi Knight regularly and drawing him closer with every passing month. Windu watched this relationship with growing unease, recognizing that no politician had ever inserted himself so far into the affairs of a Jedi. The Chancellor framed his attention as fatherly concern, but the Quarren Master saw it as interference, and the pattern only intensified as the war dragged on. As the Clone Wars progressed, Windu's suspicion of Palpatine deepened with every emergency power the Senate handed over. Though he never guessed the Chancellor was Darth Sidious, the Quarren Master watched as the Senate became a rubber stamp for one man's authority. As Palpatine accumulated power that no single leader in the Republic had ever held, drawing from the canon novel Dark Disciple by Christie Golden, the Jedi Council made the decision to target Count Dooku for elimination, a plan Windu readily supported, while others were more hesitant. This was a serious departure from traditional Jedi ethics. The Quarren Master, who once taught his Padawan that Jedi must never become enforcers, was now sanctioning the targeted elimination of a political leader. He discussed the possibility of removing the Chancellor himself and controlling the political transition of the Republic. The war had brought him here one compromise at a time, and with every emergency power granted to Palpatine, the Guardian of Rules moved closer to breaking the biggest rule of all. Instead of pulling back from the edge, the war pushed Windu further past it daily. Every new crisis confirmed his worst fears about how concentrated the Chancellor's authority had become. The closer Palpatine drew Anakin Skywalker into his orbit, the more volatile the situation grew for the Order itself. Windu saw the pattern, but his response was to tighten his grip on what he could control rather than build trust with Anakin that might have altered the outcome. This failure of connection became the most consequential mistake of his life. Then, Palpatine's request to place Anakin on the Jedi Council pushed everything to breaking. As seen in Revenge of the Sith, Windu warned his fellow masters that pairing the Chancellor with the powerful but emotionally volatile young knight was dangerous. When the Council reluctantly granted Anakin a seat, it was Windu who delivered the devastating notification that Skywalker would sit on the Council, but would not be granted the rank of Jedi Master. From Windu's perspective, the decision made perfect sense. The rank of Jedi Master required emotional maturity, wisdom earned through decades of service, and a proven ability to set aside personal feelings for the greater good. Anakin had demonstrated none of these qualities. He was formidable, arguably the most gifted Jedi alive, but power without control was exactly what Windu feared most. The Council would not grant promotions because the Chancellor wished it, and Windu would not compromise on that principle. From Windu's perspective, Anakin had not yet demonstrated the emotional maturity required. From Anakin's perspective, it was the culmination of years of distrust and dismissal from a man who had doubted him since he was a child. The Council then asked Anakin to spy on Palpatine, a decision that Windu supported but that Kenobi opposed. The tension between Windu and Skywalker had been building for over a decade, and every new demand from the Council only deepened the fracture between them. The Stover novelization reveals that Windu even began discussing the possibility of taking direct control of the Republic's political transition if the Chancellor cannot be removed through legal means. The man who had built his identity around guarding tradition and institutional order was now seriously considering a political overthrow of the Republic's elected leader. Step by step, compromise by compromise, the war had brought him to a place where the Guardian of Rules was ready to break the biggest rule of all. And then, Anakin Skywalker walked into Windu's office and told him the truth about Palpatine. The Chancellor was the Sith Lord, Darth Sidious. After Obi-Wan eliminated General Grievous on Utapau, Windu had no reason to wait. He told Anakin to stay in the Council chambers and not to interfere. Then, he gathered 3 fellow Jedi Masters, Kit Fisto, Anakin Kolar, and Saesee Tiin. The 4 of them marched to the Chancellor's office to arrest him. But Windu told Anakin to remain behind, and that single decision, the choice to leave the most emotionally unstable knight in the Order, sitting alone with his fears, while the confrontation of a lifetime unfolded without him, set in motion the chain of events that would destroy the Jedi, the Republic, and Mace Windu himself, because Anakin did not stay in the Council chambers, and what followed shattered the galaxy. Chapter 8: The Final Stand. Yet this was what Windu had feared and prepared for across his career. The confrontation began with a declaration of arrest, to which Palpatine responded with legal arguments and accusations of persecution. When Windu insisted, Sidious attacked with terrifying speed, producing a crimson lightsaber and cutting down Anakin Kolar and Saesee Tiin in mere seconds. Kit Fisto lasted only moments longer before falling. Only Windu remained standing against the full power of the Dark Lord of the Sith. The duel between Windu and Sidious was everything the Quarren Master had built toward. Sinking into Vaapad, as he had never done before, he fought the Dark Lord of the Sith blade to blade. In the Legends novelization by Matthew Stover, his fighting state was described as unprecedented. The realization that the Republic he had devoted his life to serving had already fallen under Sith control poured fury into the Force, and through Vaapad, Windu channeled it all back against the Sith Lord with devastating precision. The superconducting loop that Vaapad created between them reached its peak. Sidious's own dark side power flowed into Windu's form and was amplified by the Quarren Master's lifelong familiarity with darkness, and returned against the Sith Lord with compounding force. Every attack Sidious made only strengthened his opponent. The Dark Lord of the Sith, who had orchestrated the fall of an entire republic from the shadows, found himself losing ground to a single Jedi who had spent decades preparing for exactly this confrontation. And George Lucas himself confirmed that Windu genuinely won the lightsaber duel against the Sith. The Jedi Master drove Sidious back through the office, out onto the wind-blown ledge of the shattered window. A swift kick sent Sidious staggering, his lightsaber flying into the Coruscant skyline. Windu held his blade to the Sith Lord's throat. In the novelization, Windu realized through his Shatterpoint ability that Sidious's weakness was Anakin Skywalker himself. Critically, he did not check on Anakin's Shatterpoint. Palpatine hurled Force lightning at Windu while simultaneously begging for mercy, performing the role of a helpless old man being attacked by an out-of-control Jedi. Windu deflected the lightning back with his lightsaber, the redirected current deforming Sidious's face into his now infamous twisted visage. The lightning stopped, and the Sith Lord lay on the floor, seemingly broken and spent. And Windu made his decision. Windu declared Palpatine too dangerous to be left alive and raised his blade. But the man who learned Jedi must never become an enforcer now raised his own blade. The war had brought him to the exact place his master had once warned him about on Mathas. He had come full circle, and this time there was no teacher to stop him. Palpatine controlled the Senate and the courts. A trial would be meaningless because the system Windu had always trusted was already compromised beyond repair. And in that moment, as the Canon Master raised his blade, Anakin Skywalker arrived. Driven by his terror of losing Padme, desperate to preserve the only being who had promised him the power to save her, Anakin severed Windu's lightsaber hand in a single stroke. As Stover writes, Windu realized too late that he had forgotten to look for Anakin's own Shatterpoint, the young man's willingness to betray anyone and destroy all of it to save his wife. The one factor Windu could not control was another person's choice, and it was the one factor that decided the outcome. The ability that had defined him since childhood, the gift that had let him see where things would break, had failed him at the critical hour because he never turned it on the one person standing behind him. He had spent a lifetime building walls against his own darkness, and those walls had blinded him to the darkness growing in someone else. Decades of distrust had made it impossible for Windu to see Anakin as anything other than a risk to be managed, never as a person to be reached. Sidious dropped all pretense, and with a rejuvenated surge of lightning, he ended it. He blasted the disarmed and wounded Jedi Master through the shattered window. Mace Windu fell from the towering heights of the Senate office building and vanished into the Coruscant night, bringing an end to the life of one of the most formidable Jedi who had ever lived. His fall and Anakin's role in it directly triggered the events that destroyed the Jedi Order. As Palpatine branded the Jedi as traitors, issued Order 66, and transformed the Republic into the Galactic Empire. In the hours that followed, the clone troopers who had served alongside the Jedi for 3 years turned their weapons on their generals. Across the galaxy, Jedi Masters and Padawans fell to the soldiers they had trusted with their lives. The temple on Coruscant was stormed, and the order that had stood for 1,000 generations was destroyed in a single night. And all of it traced back to that office, that window, and the moment Mace Windu raised his blade and Anakin Skywalker made his choice. General Chamsindola remembered the Jedi Master with great respect and told his daughter Hera the tale of how Windu helped liberate their world. The name Hammer of Ryloth endured through the darkness that followed. Mace Windu had stood at the edge of saving the Republic, the blade at the throat of the most powerful Sith Lord in 1,000 years. He did not fail because he lacked skill, power, or conviction. He failed because he never looked behind him. Mace's fall opened the door to Order 66, and within hours, the entire Jedi Order was being hunted across the galaxy. Watch the full story of every time the Jedi were wiped out next.